Welcome to the Aquatic Biomes and Symbiosis video lesson. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the various aquatic biomes and their key features and characteristics, along with the three types of symbiotic relationships that exist and examples of each. Let's get started with aquatic biomes here. Let's start with the freshwater biomes, which include rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, and freshwater wetlands. I think we're all familiar with rivers and streams and lakes and ponds, but freshwater wetlands we may need a little brush up on. So let's take a look at these examples. There are three examples of freshwater wetlands. There's the bog, the marsh, and the swamp. You can see how each is pretty unique. A bog you can actually safely walk on. And even though there's water there, the water tends to be under the surface of all this vegetation. And this surface of vegetation can really compact into great depths. And bogs are typically where you would find peat moss made, which some of you may recognize that's used as a planting product when growing seedlings and supplementing soil in your gardens. So bogs are really important and really neat. If you ever get a chance to go out and have a lesson in one of them, I would highly recommend that you do so. They're really neat ecosystems. A marsh tends to be like what we see up at Montezuma at the north end of Cayuga Lake, where you have a lot of grassy area and then the water rises and falls depending on the water level and fills in the grassy area, and this would be a marsh. A swamp tends to be a more wooded area where the water is flooded in and you can see all these trees with the water in around them, and so that tends to be the characteristics of a swamp. Our next aquatic biome is an estuary. An estuary is that region of water that lies between the freshwater and the oceans. So it's a mixture of freshwater and saltwater. Here is a really nice aerial photograph of an estuary, and what you can see is the stream coming down and emptying into the ocean, and then the ocean waves coming in this direction. So you have this region right in here where you're going to have a mix of freshwater and saltwater, and this is a really neat ecosystem, and you get a really interesting variety of organisms that are able to survive in that environment, transitioning from the freshwater to the purely saltwater out here. So estuary is a really unique aquatic biome. That transitions us into aquatic biomes that contain salt water, and these are called marine biomes. Marine biomes, we typically think of oceans and seas. Marine biomes have several zones. There is the intertidal zone, which is greatly impacted by high and low tides. We have the coastal zone, which extends from the low tide mark to the edge of the continental shelf. And we have the open ocean. The open ocean is divided into what are called photic, which is the top 200 meters, and the aphotic zones. We also have the benthic zone to take into consideration, which is the lowest level of body of water, including the sediment surface and some subsurface layers. And just a side note here that the benthic zone not only applies to oceans, but any aquatic biome. Clear definitions on the photic and aphotic zone. The photic zone is the top 200 meters sunlit portion of the open ocean. Photic, photo, you may recognize that as light, so that's a good way to remember that. That is the portion of the open ocean that gets the light, which can reach at about 200 meters down. The rest of it would be the aphotic zone, which is permanently dark. It's the permanently dark portion of the open ocean below the photic zone. Here we have a really nice diagram showing the zones we just talked about. Here we have the intertidal zone, and you can see this line right here that would be the high tide line, and this line, of course, where the water is now would be the low tide line. This zone is really unique in the amount and the type of organisms that live in this kind of environment right here. In this diagram, the coastal zone is called the neritic zone, but it's the same thing. It's just a different name for it. So this area here, from the low tide mark down to the edge of the continental shelf, where you can see it kind of drops off right there, that is called the coastal zone. Okay? From here out is the open ocean, or otherwise called the oceanic zone. And here we have the other layers that we talked about, the top 200 meters or so being the photic zone, and below that being the aphotic zone. Notice they've also done a nice job labeling the benthic zone here, which is the lowest level of this particular ocean, including the sediment surface. Okay, so all this region right here next to the surface itself, all the way down in through here, is called the benthic zone. The organisms that live in this type of environment are called benthos, and that's a term covered in your textbook as well. Next, let's discuss symbiosis. Symbiosis is a relationship between two organisms. There are three types of symbiotic relationships. The first type of symbiotic relationship we'll look at here is called mutualism. Mutualism is a relationship between two organisms in which both organisms benefit from the relationship. You can remember this one because of mutualism. A couple nice examples of mutualism are shown in this diagram. We have a rhinoceros with these birds that are eating on the rhinoceros, but they're not actually eating the rhinoceros, they're eating the bugs that are parasites on the rhinoceros. So this is an example of mutualism because the birds get food by eating the bugs, and the rhinoceros also benefits from this relationship because the birds eat the parasites that are harming the rhinoceros. Over here is a classic local example of mutualism, which is the bee and the flower. The bee benefits from this relationship in that it gets food from the flower by eating the pollen. The flower also benefits from this relationship because the bee helps pollinate the flower. In the process of getting food, it knocks pollen onto the pistil of the flower and helps fertilize that flower so that it can be fertilized and continue to produce seeds and grow and reproduce. Our next type of symbiotic relationship we're going to look at here is called parasitism. Parasitism is the relationship between two organisms in which one organism benefits and the other organism is harmed. Most of us are familiar with the term parasite, and that usually has a negative connotation. So parasitism, one organism benefits and the other organism is harmed. Two classic examples of parasitism are this example here with the mosquito and the person here that's about to get their blood sucked out. The mosquito obviously benefits in this relationship because it gets food out of the person, while the person is harmed. A person can catch diseases and other things that the mosquito is carrying. For example, the West Nile virus is a great example of that. Over here, we have a leech that is attached to its host, and of course the leech gets blood from the host, and again the host can be harmed because the leech can give the host here diseases or other things, and actually just draining its blood is harmful in and of itself. So both of these are classic examples of parasitism. Our third and last symbiotic relationship is commensalism. Commensalism is the relationship between two organisms in which one organism benefits and the other organism is neither harmed or benefited in the relationship. So one organism benefits and the other organism is neither harmed or benefited. Here are two great examples of commensalism. Here we have a spider that has built its web between the horns of this African animal right here. Well, the spider benefits from this because it creates obviously a home in which to capture food and to lay eggs and reproduce. The animal itself is neither harmed nor benefits from this relationship. It's just providing a home to the spider between its horns. Great picture. Over here we have barnacles that are attached to a sea turtle. You might think, well, that's got to be parasitism. Barnacles eat plankton. They actually aren't feeding on the turtle. So the barnacles benefit from this relationship because the turtle, by swimming around, takes the barnacles into different places of the ocean environment, and therefore it gets food. The turtle is not harmed by the barnacles because the barnacles aren't doing anything harmful to it, and the turtle is not benefited from this relationship either. So a great example of commensalism. That'll do it for our lesson on marine aquatic biomes and symbiotic relationships. Obviously, we'll apply more of this information in class as we look at various questions to answer and other items in this unit.